Hi, this is Alison from the Bar Exam Toolbox. Today we're talking about the top ways people waste time studying for the bar. All right, Lee, well, I don't think the first one on this list is going to be a shock to anyone who has probably ever listened to any of our podcasts together. Top way people waste time, passive versus active work. Do you agree?
Oh, I 100% agree. And I've got to say that one of the issues around this is that a lot of commercial bar programs are set up to help you with this. I mean, they're really
big time.
set up for this. So they really lean in to passive work. And what we mean by passive is you're sitting back, you're watching the video, and the information is just washing over you.
Right. And I would actually even put reading outlines into this category.
Fair
a
point.
Little bit less. I mean, I put my hierarchy of really passive work is you're watching the video. You're like, cool, I'm on my phone, whatever. That's the worst, let's be honest. Second worst, I would say, is just passively reading an outline and consuming that information that way. Even that is not great.
No, it's really not, because you're not engaging with the material. I think another passive activity is just typing things. A lot of folks think that retyping things creates retention. And unfortunately, the science doesn't really back that up. It turns out that just typing things out does not, utilize the parts of our brain that help us really retain information. And so it might feel like you're spending time, you're copying outlines, over and over again. Doesn't seem like it has as much impact as many people wish it would.
Yeah. And I mean, I can see an argument maybe if you're just really drilling rules and you want to type them 5 times or something for the most critical ones, fine. I would say that's a little more active. What I see some people doing, or I hear about people doing, or they tell me they do, is literally copying answers from other people that they didn't write. That's going to somehow help. I mean,
yeah.
Maybe a little bit. I don't think that's going to be your most efficient use of time. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're not saying these things have no value. We're saying you could be doing something else that has more value.
Yes. And I think that is a great distinction. If you're just sitting, looking at the outline, copying it down or copying an answer, that's very different than quizzing yourself and saying, I'm going to type at my computer as fast as I can, all the hearsay exceptions and their rules. I mean, that's not passive.
Right. That's you're actually thinking, you're
right.
You're trying to remember things, you're seeing what you don't remember, your brain is working to get it, and then you see that you didn't get it. That's great. That's actually how you learn.
Right.
But just I feel at some point it becomes almost did you ever take a typing class?
Oh, I did.
Yeah. So do you remember when they had you type passages and you're just typing them? You're not reading them. You're just trying to get the characters. So yeah, if that's the realm of what you're doing, you're probably wasting time.
Yeah. And we all type so fast that you're really not, you're just flopping stuff on the page. It's just not really the same engagement as doing things another way. So you just have to be really aware. And I think when folks, kind of do check-ins, we also talk in our podcast a lot about needing to kind of evaluate how things are going. And I just think this is such a really critical check-in point for yourself. Am I falling into the trap of passive learning? And if I am, how can I march out of it? I just think that that's got to be something you ask yourself all the time.
Yeah, I would even say you should be tracking your time probably. And if you find that, the majority of your time is spent doing passive activities, or even you're getting anywhere close to the majority, which I would say for a lot of people, it's well over the majority. It might be upwards of 80 or 90% a lot of days. That is a problem. You need to stop and do something else.
Yeah, I super agree. Another big time waster or mistake that folks make when studying for the bar is overfocusing on one portion of the test and ignoring the rest. And what drives me crazy is I hear that there are tutors and bar providers out there who make this recommendation. Every now and then they'll say oh, well, I was told not to do the performance test. And I'm like, well, that is terrible advice. I don't know what to say.
I mean, I just really hate seeing somebody fail the bar because of the performance test. The performance test is not a reason you should fail the bar.
No.
But I mean, there are people who literally, have gone in and never done one. I think that's a really terrible idea. You see this a lot of times with people who maybe they fail once, they get their score report, and they're like, well, the one I see a lot is, well, I didn't pass either section, but the MBE was worse, so I'm just going to work on that.
Oh, and
Yeah.
You see the flip-flop.
Yeah.
Then we
time,
talk to
right.
them again, and then their MBE scores pass, but their writing score doesn't.
Yeah.
Because they only did MBE questions.
Yeah, I see this a lot. We're talking to them like the third time or the fourth time, and it's like, oh, what happened here? Well, I only studied for like this one portion of the test. I mean, I understand how that can kind of seem like it makes sense. And, the reality is if you are way better at one section than another, like, yeah, you need to spend less time on the one you're better at, but you can't spend no time on it.
No. And I think that this happens almost more often when somebody does well on the multiple choice, because they think that they can like check that box and assume that they will perform, 6 months later on the next test. Like a lot can happen in 6 months. And if you did, perform well after doing thousands of questions and tracking your answers and and all of that stuff and just stop completely, even if you're reviewing the law, you are out of practice. And so, I think that there is a huge argument for just being very diligent and making sure that practice continues and tracking to make sure that those scores do not drop. Because if your accuracy starts to dip, that is something you need to be aware of. And then you need to allocate more time. So that's why kind of doing these check-ins and making sure that nothing is kind of falling behind as you're working on getting ready for all the parts of the test is so critical.
Yeah. And I would just start by the default of like, you should study basically essentially the proportion of the test in your time. So, if it's one day multiple choice, one day writing, all right, 50-50. I mean, you might be able to dial back the PT a bit because you don't have to memorize anything. So maybe that's like 10% of your study time. The writing is 40%, and then the MBE is 50%. And then that's like your baseline. And then if there are reasons to start adjusting that, you start adjusting it. But to go to 90% or 100% one thing, I just think is a really bad idea.
Yeah. And you're just kind of gambling with your scores. I know everyone wants to game the system. We've been doing this for so many years now. And I wish there was a great way to game the system. And there really is not. Hard work and diligent work and tailoring your studying to yourself is really the only way that you can game the system. We've tried to find the others.
Yeah.
They don't really exist.
Yeah, and I would say studying smart. It's like you don't want to go in never having looked at a whole topic area for the essays or something. Sometimes people try to do that. They're like, well, I'm going to focus just on the MBE essays and ignore like the other ones. Like that is unlikely to end well. Like you need at least a baseline knowledge of these topics. Yes. If you don't have it and you get that essay, like you are in big trouble.
I see scores. Well, you'll see, especially on the UBE, like a 1 or a 2. And I will ask somebody and say, like, where'd this 1 or a 2 come from?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, I was told that wouldn't be tested.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but they can test whatever they want. And how did that work out? And sometimes that one essay, that 1 or 2, can be the difference maker because it might feel like folks fail by these large margins, but we talk to people who fail by 1 point, 3 points, 5 points, 8 points. Like we're not talking about huge margins here. We're talking about tiny margins. And if you just want to bank that they're not going to test, Civ Pro because you don't like it in an essay, I just don't think that that's wise to do. And on my bar, that happens. Barbary told us they would never test remedies. And I have friends who did not study remedies. And remedies was question number 4. I am very risk averse and do not like to gamble. So I crammed remedies that morning while drinking my coffee because I was very nervous about it. I didn't take it in law school. And boy, was I pleased when I got there and saw number 4. I was like, thank you, Bar, for giving me that.
Yeah. I mean, we're not saying you are ever going to know every single thing about every topic, but you need at least a baseline knowledge of everything, like the general areas that could be tested. And certainly remedies is one of those in California.
Yes. And I think that's what, the smart bar prep outlines are great for because they highlight for you what is most heavily tested in all of the subjects. Learn that at the minimum because that is what has shown up on the test. Now, are you going to know every nuance? Yeah. Are you going to know every nuance? No. And is that an okay gamble? Sure. But if it shows up over and over again, then it's a huge mistake not to know that.
Right. I mean, you want to be in the 3 range on the UBE, not the 1 range. Right. And knowing the basics of a topic will get you to the 3 if you do a decent analysis. It's not going to get you a 5 or 6, but you don't need a 5 or 6. You just don't need the 1.
Right. And that's the thing. When we see these tight margins, it's those 1s and 2s that can pull that score down. You get 2 essays with 1s and 2s on them.
You're not
going to pass.
Yeah.
You're just not going to pass. All right. Another mistake is studying stuff that you already know.
Oh, I love this.
I know.
It's one of my favorites. Everyone's like, well, I don't want to feel bad about myself, which is totally understandable.
Totally understandable.
I'm just going to review the areas I already feel confident in. How does that work out usually?
It doesn't go so well because they don't test on that typically.
Right. Or if they do, you already know it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's just really not how you learn new stuff. You learn new stuff by putting yourself in uncomfortable situations where you have to test yourself. I think about one of the latest Adam Grant books where he was talking about people who speak multitudes of languages. I'm blanking on the name. Polyglots. Polyglots. Thank you. And he was interviewing them to say, like, how do you learn how to speak all of these languages? And all of them said, you put yourself in situations where you can only speak that language. And then you just muddle through and you force yourself to try and put words together. And I mean, unfortunately, that sounds miserable, but I see why it's effective.
It's so hard. I remember that in Mexico. Like, the reason I had so much trouble learning Spanish was just like, I would not talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, of course I'm not going to learn to speak Spanish if I literally won't speak it. Duh.
Yeah.
But it's just so hard to do.
It's so hard. And the law is no different. If you really want to memorize all those hearsay exceptions, you have to test yourself on those hearsay exceptions constantly and force yourself to try and recall them, maybe write them down, and then do it again if you get it wrong. I think that doesn't make you feel smart or confident, but the reality is that heavy lifting and actually that testing, failure, and relearning is one of the ways that our brain is wired to learn, which makes sense, right? Yeah. It's like if you do something and there's a bad outcome, you are going to want to remember how to not make that bad outcome happen.
Exactly.
One would think, right? Don't eat the mushroom that made you sick. Like,
right. Don't touch the hot stove.
Exactly. Like all of that. And so we're wired that way. So you can use those little tricks in your studying, but you have to be willing to not have very much fun.
Yeah. And so I think this is a great example of if you're using something like Adaptable or UWorld, you're actually getting data over time. So start looking at that data and do more questions and more review and more practice of the ones you're not getting right. If you're already at 80%, you're not going to get to 100. No one ever gets to 100. But if you're at 40%, 50%, you can easily get that to like 60 or 70. And that's a huge jump on the MBE.
Yeah.
So don't study the stuff you already know as much. Number 4. All right. We see this one a lot. Big time waster, overusing a lot of different resources. So people will come and they'll talk to us and say, well, what did you use to study for the bar? And they say, well, I used Barbie or Themis, and then I also had this, and I also had that, and I also had this, and I also had that, and I also had this. And then at the end, I'm like, whoa. You don't need all those things. Like, that is a waste of time.
Yeah. And the reality is you need a good, solid, accurate statement of the law. And then just learn that. Just one. Just pick one. Whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. But you just have to have one. Because the statements in these outlines are going to be like slightly different. Yeah. And so you don't want to ask yourself to memorize 2 slightly different rules. That's not a great solution. So you just want one rule that is an adequate rule that you can memorize, and then move on. And I think that is really hard to do. Again, it goes back to this idea of where's the magic outline? Where's the magic material? Yeah. And unfortunately, there is not one. And so the magic material is the one that you study.
Right, exactly. And sometimes we'll see people get really caught up in like, well, this outline says this rule this way, and this one says this. Which one's right? It's like they're probably both right, and they're both fine. Stop worrying about this.
Right. Spend your time doing something else. Yeah. All right. Another issue that we see over and over again is going it alone with just no feedback on your work. And, a lot of your bar providers will allow you to get feedback. You may or may not find their feedback helpful, but no matter what, you should get that feedback. One, because you have paid for it, so you should get that feedback. And if it's not helpful, then you need to go get feedback that is. But any feedback's better than no feedback, and then make sure that whatever feedback you're getting is working for you. But how else are you going to be able to tell how you're doing? I mean, you were mentioning for multiple choice questions, we can use these products that are able to kind of give us data. feedback is how you get data on your writing. And that's how you can tell if you need to make shifts. So it's so important to use whatever feedback resources you have, whether it's your bar provider, whether it's your school. Some schools will use their academic support offices over, especially the summer term, to give additional feedback. Maybe it's even exchanging essays with a friend, although you have to remember that you are both at the same level of knowledge about things. You can even give yourself solid feedback if you're like highlighting IRAC and double checking everything. That is also important. But just any feedback and utilizing that feedback, learning from it, rewriting, doing the uncomfortable things that you do with that feedback, it's just so critical. And that's really, I think, where utilizing tutors like on our team who can really dive into that feedback for you and clarify where you're leaving points on the table. I think that is very, very powerful. And of course, our team is always there to help if you're looking for some clarity around how your writing is doing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for a lot of people, there are sort of big red flashing problems that we can fix pretty quickly for you or help you fix quickly, at least by identifying them and like putting you through the paces to not continue doing the same thing. But I mean, we talk to people all the time who fail and they're like, I think my writing was great. And you look at it and you're like, your writing was not great. Would you like me to tell you why? Yes. And I think that, again, that's a hard thing. Nobody likes to hear that, like, maybe they're not hitting the mark, but I would rather hear that before I take the exam than look at it afterwards.
Oh, 100%. So you just need to really lean into this practice, and if you're not getting feedback because you're not practicing, then that's also a red flag.
That's a problem.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to the MBE. Another time waster mistake that we see is just guessing on a lot of questions and not really evaluating how it's going.
Yeah. Sometimes you talk to people and they're like, I did like 3,000 questions. You're like, well, okay. Did you review those questions? Did you do any of those questions open book, like to learn from them? Like, no, I just did them. Like, all right, cool. Probably not the most helpful thing you could do if it's not going well on the MBE. I mean, if you're getting, 70% of the MBE questions, sure, just do a lot of them. But if you're not, you need to kind of like take that step back and break down for yourself, like what is happening here? How can I use these as a learning tool? How can I get better at them? And just being like, oh, looks like it was B, not C, moving on is not really that helpful.
Yeah. Ooh, can we pause here to discuss what was discussed in our Slack channel recently about how many MBE questions that you need to get right? Because we have been hearing from some students that there are some blog posts and some recommendations that really show like how many questions you need to get right to get a certain score on the MBE. And again, we're not gambling people. So one of the things that's interesting is that sometimes students can take this kind of data and say, well, on UWorld or Adaptive-R, I am getting 64% correct. And according to this chart that I found on the internet, it says that I would get a 133 or whatever it might be. I'm not referencing the chart, so I'm making up numbers.
It's something around there.
It's something like that. And then they're like, so why didn't I pass the last time?
Right. Like I was getting 64%. And like, well, okay, A, that chart is quite possibly wrong. B, were you getting that in like the last 2 weeks? Was this your entire thing? Like, they're just all these things. I mean, I remember way back in the day, we talked to someone at Adaptive-R on the podcast, and they were like, if you do 2,000 questions, you're getting 70% on average, like your odds of passing are astronomically high.
Right.
I think that's a great baseline. Like when you start kind of chipping away at it, you're like, well, I did, 1,500 and I was getting 67%. It's like, well, your odds of passing are starting to move down. Like, can I tell you exactly what they are? No. Then you get to like, well, I love this one. I did a lot of questions. Every time someone tells me this that didn't pass, and I ask them what a lot means to them, almost always I get an answer between 700 and 800.
Or lower, like 400.
I'm just saying, like, for me, it's like always 700 to 800. I don't know why this is, but that's not a lot of questions.
And I get it. Everyone wants to feel confident going into the test. But the other thing you always have to remember is under testing conditions, you are stressed. There's massive time pressure. You may have testing anxiety. There are distractions. So I think that the performance that you can do in the comfort of your own cozy room where you're studying often will not align with what you can do under stress. And so
100%.
yeah. So if we're saying like, sure, maybe you do need a 65 to 70% to generally speaking pass the MBE, but that is in under examined conditions, which are almost never the same performance conditions that you have leading up to the test. So, that really means that you want to have like a solid cushion so you can go into the room and hopefully get close to that number. But most people aren't going to find that in the room you knock it out of the park. And that's also because you can't check your answer choices. You don't have all your comfort things. You can't be drinking water. You're tired. You're stressed.
Yeah.
Like I was really tired and stressed and hungry. I got really hungry in the afternoon session. And I was upset that I hadn't eaten more breakfast or lunch. I think it was at lunch. I didn't eat enough lunch. And then I went back and then I could hear my stomach grumbling and I was sitting there and then I started to get mad that my tummy was grumbling. And then I realized if I didn't refocus, I wasn't going to pass. But these are the things that happen in the exam room. So one, eat more lunch, better idea. But two, like you don't know what will happen in the room, or what if there's somebody sniffling next to you, or people have all sorts of
I had
wild
somebody
things
crying
happen.
behind me the first exam I took in the middle of the exam, and I was just like, wow, this is really distracting.
Yeah, people collapse. And they don't stop the test. You really need to have a cushion. So
totally.
I know I went off script a little bit, but that conversation just really, I felt like it needed to be inserted here. Sorry.
No, for sure. We were all like, I don't think those numbers are necessarily correct in any way. You shouldn't rely on them. Yeah. All right. Well, moving back to our list, number 7 on our list with the essays, shifting focus. I see a lot of people who are only outlining them or always doing them open book or never doing them timed. That's all like great to do sometimes, but you need to actually sit and write essays, preferably back to back under exam conditions, or you are just wasting some of your time.
Yeah. And let's talk about getting feedback on some of these open book like questions that you have lots of time. Like if you can write a passing answer open book and with extra time,
cool,
amazing. That is not the game we are playing. Like your job is to do the best answer you can, close booked under time conditions. Anything you write past time conditions will not be read. So,
no, or it will be read and you will not have time on a different essay.
Right. That's true. So I do think that although in the beginning of studying, there may be a time and a place for open book or using some extended time. But as you march closer to the test, you really have to force yourself under those time conditions. So maybe you bumble through it and you're like, wow, that didn't go well. Well, then review the law and rewrite it.
Right.
Try it again. You can do lots of things so you don't feel like it's a wasted essay. But feedback is wasted if it is a fully polished essay that does not reflect timed conditions and exam conditions. I bet almost everyone sitting for this test with unlimited time and resources could write great answers to these questions. You graduated from law school. That's not the game that we're playing right now.
Yeah, and I think there's value even if you pull an essay that you don't know what the topic or whatever is, and you're like, wow, I'm really drawing a blank here. To force yourself to sit and struggle with that for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, depending on which exam you're taking. Because you might have to do that on exam day.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that this point, for those who are thinking in the future about the next gen, is also going to be important because we're not going to be so used to some of these questions. And you probably are going to get something where you're going to be like, huh,
like, wow,
that's interesting. Weird. That's weird. Haven't seen that before. That wasn't in the practice set. Oops.
Right. Like, oh, they came up with something new on this. Okay.
Yeah.
So and then you got to like take the deep breath and deal with it.
And figure it out. And so I do think that this practice of, wow, this is a bummer, I got to figure it out. It happened on my bar, happens to almost everyone. Then you just make the most of what you have and hope for the best. But that is a skill you have to develop.
No, I remember multiple questions on the California bar, which I was not prepared for a lot of those essay questions, to be fair. And I remember opening one and they were asking like details about the difference between the California rules of evidence and the federal rules of evidence. And I don't know at that point that I'd even looked at the California rules of evidence. I was like, I had 2 weeks to prepare for this exam. I was just like, whoa, all right, well, what would a reasonable other rule be on this topic? And I just made it up and I assigned one to California and I assigned one to the federal rules. And I have no idea if any of it was right, but I wrote something down and I passed.
Yeah. And that's part of it, is just making the best of the situation, collecting all the points you can collect. And then the grades fall where they may.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned studying for the bar in 2 weeks. A lot of people just try to memorize all the rules in 2 weeks,
Not a
which
good
I
idea.
do think is also a terrible idea.
Yeah, I think memorization, like the more I learn about this, we've done tons of podcasts on spaced repetition with Gabe Tenenbaum. They're really interesting. You can go listen to them. But we cannot cram all this material in a couple of weeks. Like we have to spread it out. So if you do this in, 10-minute increments, 15-minute increments daily, you're going to have a lot of the material in your head. But trying to just cram it all in the last 2 weeks is not going to work. And also is taking time away from things you should be doing in those last 2 weeks, like exam condition test days.
Yeah. I also think that cramming releases you from having to do a lot of that practice, which does make people feel really uncomfortable. And so if you have this narrative of like, I don't have time to do any practice questions because all I'm doing is memorizing the law. Like,
Right.
okay, but you still have to practice executing the test. And I think that it's kind of I'm not saying that anyone's doing it to say like, I'm not going to prepare adequately for the test, but it's these little self-sabotaging narratives that we can tell ourselves. And I think it can become a self-sabotaging narrative because you're like, well, can't do any of this other work that I don't want to do. So I'll just keep staring at these outlines, going back to that passive versus active discussion right earlier. It's like, well, I'm just going to memorize and study this law, look at my flashcards, not really force myself to try and recall things, not really force myself to wrestle with fact patterns, hope it goes well. I think that's a really easy trap to fall into.
I agree. And like the memorization at the end often ends up being just rereading outlines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, as we said, like your brain can't memorize more than like, I don't know, half an hour in a day or something. So really all that other time is you're just cramming in stuff that's not going to stick anyway.
Yeah. It's so
don't do it. Start
early. Don't do it. Yeah. All right. Another time waster is outside study-related distractions. Oh, it's one of our new favorite topics to talk about is distractions. What are your favorites? Some of mine, Reddit. Everybody loves a good bar exam Reddit. Even AI tools, which can be helpful, are now becoming a major distraction for folks because they are now overutilizing it to do things that it's not really either going to be helpful to do or is supposed to do. That's not even mentioning social media, your phone. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think you got two categories here. You've got your study related distractions, and then you've got your kind of other focus sapping distractions, whether, like you said, social media, video games, like binge watching TV. I don't know. Everybody has their poison. You probably know what your poison is. It might be time to just put that on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Extreme moderation, maybe better just to go cold turkey. But yeah, I think these study related distractions they're so seductive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if Reddit's telling you like, oh, well, this is what's going to be on. What do you think's going to be on it? What do you think? Or did this thing happen or that thing happen? I mean, this was like a huge problem, obviously, when California was going like off script in February on their own exam, and there are legitimate concerns and anxieties people have, but you really have to moderate how much A, time, and B, attention you're giving to these different platforms that really probably are not getting you that much closer. And also the prediction stuff and all of that. Like, again, like, okay, maybe glance at it. There might be some truth. You're like, well, they haven't tested this for a while, so you want to be ready for it. Cool. But much beyond that, I don't think it's a great idea.
No, and I think you can really get sucked into this discussion of like, what's the magic answer, right? And everyone's going to be on there. Even bar review providers are on Reddit commenting about things, claiming that they have the magic answers. I mean, it can be magic for different people. Like, I'm not saying that there aren't, a number of different avenues to passing the bar, but anyone who's sure that their way is the answer for everyone, I would be wary about that. I don't know. I feel like we just really have to put guardrails on this stuff because you can just lose yourself. And part of the problem is that all of these things are designed to keep you engaged. And when you have to do something boring like study for the bar, which no one gets up in the morning and is like, hey, you know what I want to do? I should study for the bar exam. Like, nobody says that. Like, nobody. I don't know anyone who's like, this is the best experience ever. And so because of that, we're all looking for an out, like not to do it, right? And so if you're using any sort of distraction tool, depending on what your distraction of choice is, it's designed to keep you there. And so since you don't really want to be doing the other thing anyway, it's really easy for it to keep you there. And I think AI, a lot of people aren't talking about how they're also now really getting more aggressive about asking another question, asking what else they can do to keep you engaged. That's not even to say things about YouTube or even now, like all these TV apps that just start playing the next show without you clicking on anything. Who here, I mean, I'm not saying I ever do this, but like wakes up having like realized that maybe that their phone or iPad has been playing hours of TV shows that they didn't know because you just fell asleep and it just now keeps playing. It doesn't stop. It's weird. It happens so much that we forget to acknowledge that it's designed to keep us there. And the harder of a thing that you're trying to do, I think the more susceptible you are to those distractions.
I agree. And I think with the AI stuff, it can be really, very helpful up to a certain point where you're like, tell me, explain this to me in a different way, explain that to me in a different way. And then suddenly all you're doing is chit-chatting with, your AI tool of choice. Be like, and tell me more about this and tell me more about that. And it spits some stuff out and you kind of read it. That's basically passive at that point. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, and they're giving you positive reinforcement because the AI chatbots are all designed to make us feel good.
Oh, that's such a great question. You're working so hard. Mm-hmm. You're definitely going to pass this test.
Right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure if you ask the chatbot, I haven't tried this, but if you ask the chatbot, like, is this a good use of my time? I'm sure they will all be like, it is. This is a great use of your time.
Let's keep going. Yeah. Would you like to upgrade to the $100 a month plan now? You've run out of your $20 a month plan.
Yeah,
sorry.
You've used all your data. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So just be cognizant, I think, of, again, like we talked about in number 1, what are you spending your time on? And if it is not stuff that's getting you closer to passing, then stop doing that and do something else. Because we want you to pass this test. Like we actually do want you to pass.
We want you to put this behind you. I know I saw a friend who is a incredibly brilliant, high functioning professional person, not in the legal field. And she was describing how she got caught up in a Netflix show and just stayed up way too late. So she's like, I knew I should stop watching, but I really wanted to know what happened. And now I'm exhausted and and all this stuff. It happens to everyone. It happens to absolutely everyone.
Totally.
I know. And so you just have to be wary of it. But we do want you to put this behind you and then you can watch all the Netflix you want.
Exactly. It'll be such a relief. You can just be like, I'm going to binge watch voluntarily.
Right.
And I'm not ruining my bar study.
Exactly. So like most things, I think, as we kind of wrap up, you just have to be honest with yourself and, take some moments for reflection and check in to see if any of these time wasters or kind of self-sabotaging behaviors are creeping in, because really it happens to basically all of us about one thing or another. So you just 100%. You have to you just have to take a hot minute and say, how am I doing? What am I spending my time on? Is this working? Is there something I need to be doing differently? Do I need extra help? Do I need support? Do I need to talk to somebody about this? Those are exactly what are good uses of your time thing. So you can make sure that the time that you're putting in is getting you closer to your goals.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Please subscribe and give us a like or a comment, and we'll see you soon. And check out barexamtoolbox.com for more help.